Hey guys, tonight we're going to time travel back to a place that smells like scorched flour, hot iron, and vague despair. You'll be waking up in a bakery. But not just any bakery, a Victorian bakery. It's still dark out, and the city of London is groaning under the weight of coal fog and class tension. The roosters aren't even up yet, but you are because you're a baker. And unfortunately, that means sleep is now optional. You've been up since around 2:30 a.m., give or take a rat infestation or an exploding oven door. Your first task? Open the bakery's heavy back door without waking the landlord's dog, which bites exclusively male ankles. Then you shuffle in and breathe that first heady gasp of air, equal parts yeast ash and something you'd rather not identify. The stone floor is cold underfoot. Your boots are still damp from yesterday's rain, and the bread hasn't even begun to rise yet. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment letting me know where you're listening from and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step into the bakehouse. It's barely a room, more like a coal-lined cavern. Every surface is dusted in fine white flour, except for the ones blackened with soot. There's a low ceiling, wooden beams streaked with past fires, and one great yawning brick oven at the far end like a hungry beast waiting to be fed. Victorian bakeries weren't exactly designed for comfort. They were designed for endurance, and you're the one being tested. You reach for your apron, which isn't so much white as it is formerly white. There's no time for tea, no time for breakfast. In fact, you'll be lucky to nibble a crust before noon. The dough from yesterday has to be checked, the fires stoked, the surfaces cleaned of rat droppings. Yes, that's a real thing. And the sacks of flour inspected for signs of moisture, mold, or weevils. Spoiler, they're never totally clear. You light the fires. Victorian ovens are tricky beasts, temple-like structures built from fire brick and iron, designed to retain heat for hours, but never quite consistent. No knobs, no thermometers. You check the heat the old-fashioned way, by sticking your bare arm inside and guessing. If it doesn't feel like it's trying to roast your soul, it's not hot enough yet. The firewood is damp again. The coal burns too quick again. The wind whips through the cracked panes, sending ash into your flour bin. And you sneeze again. Historians still argue whether these early morning hours were the most brutal or the most peaceful in a baker's life. On one hand, there's no noise, no shouting, no customers. On the other hand, your joints hurt, your eyes sting, and you haven't even rolled the dough yet. A mainstream fact to chew on while you knead. In Victorian England, bakers were legally obligated to begin their workday by 3 a.m. to meet the morning demand. The breakfast rush wasn't invented by Starbucks. It's as old as bricks and yeast. And that's the thing about Victorian society. Everyone wanted hot, fresh bread, but no one wanted to know the cost. The cost, in your case, is a slowly crooked spine, soot-rimmed fingernails, and the type of fatigue that hums behind your eyes like a low-grade fever. You start mixing the dough. No stand mixers here, just elbow grease and the rhythm of your breath. You fold and press and fold again. Your hands are part muscle, part callus. And it's only now, maybe 4 a.m., that you remember it's Thursday. That means an extra dozen loaves for the almshouse. You're not getting paid for that, but it's expected. Your apprentice, a boy who's 12 maybe, though you suspect he's younger, shuffles in late, chewing on something suspiciously sugary. He forgot to dust the proofing shelves last night. Again. You sigh, which sends up another puff of flour. This is your life now. A slow dance with yeast and exhaustion. Occasionally, a customer or inspector wanders in early. You dread the inspectors. They come in with rulers and scales, ready to fine you for selling underweight bread or using flour mixed with barley husks. It doesn't matter that the government rations mean your flour is half air and hope. The law is the law, and you can be shut down faster than your oven cools. Victorian England had a curious relationship with bread. It was both sacred and suspect. Too small a loaf? You're a cheat. Too large? You're wasteful. Too crusty? You're hiding bad dough. Not crusty enough? You're a fraud. There's a reason bakeries kept their scales chained to the counter, because even customers didn't trust you. As the first dough batch rises near the fire, you take a moment to stretch your back, already stiff. A pigeon flutters past the broken attic slats, and you wonder not for the first time if this is really what you were meant to do. Then a loud crack from the oven reminds you, the bread waits for no man. Outside, the city begins to stir. You can hear the clatter of hooves, the shout of milkmen, the rustle of chimney sweeps starting their rounds. But down here in the belly of the bakehouse, you stay locked in your flour-dusted ritual. You fold, you shape, you rise. Again and again, you are a cog in a hot, yeasty machine. And somehow, oddly, there's comfort in that. The oven's belly glows orange now, full of hissing coal and snapping wood. You've gotten it to the sweet spot hot enough to blister dough, but not so hot it blackens the crust to cinder. It's a narrow window, like trying to toast a marshmallow in a volcano, and you're expected to hit it blind. Every single day. You slide in the first loaves using a long wooden peel, your extension arm, really. The handle's been scorched, gnawed, and polished by sweat. It's shaped like a paddle, but it might as well be a weapon. Not against customers, of course, but against the oven itself. Because Victorian ovens, in their infinite wisdom, didn't heat evenly. One side might be warm and steady, the other a merciless hellmouth. As you shuffle loaves around to avoid overbaking one side, you catch a gust of soot to the face. It settles in your eyelashes like coal confetti. You blink, wipe your sleeve across your brow, and keep going. It's barely 5 a.m., and your hands already look like you've been mining rather than baking. Ash in your eyebrows. Bread on your back. You've hauled 2 flour sacks already this morning. Each weighs around 140 pounds. Give or take, how generous your supplier's been with sawdust or chalk. Yes, chalk. We'll come back to that in a later chapter. There's no pulley system, no delivery cart, just your back, a canvas apron, and sheer spite. A mainstream historical fact for you. Most urban bakeries during the Victorian period received their flour in bulk deliveries, large canvas sacks offloaded by hand from horse-drawn wagons. If your bakery was smaller or in a narrow alley, that meant hauling them yourself from the corner where the cart could fit. Bakers were known for their hunched posture and stiff gait, not because of age, but because of flour. Your spine doesn't thank you. Neither do your feet, currently soaked through from yesterday's leaky roof. The tiles up top haven't been replaced in 17 years, and rain has an irritating way of locating the exact spot where your workbench sits. You cough again. The flour and soot make an impressive duet inside your lungs. Some bakers kept rags tied around their mouths, makeshift masks, long before the word was fashionable. You just try not to breathe too deeply. Your apprentice drops something. It sounds like a rolling pin, possibly his brain. You don't look. You don't have time. The dough that's resting on the back shelves has started to swell. You poke it too gently and it'll collapse. Too long and it overproofs. Timing in a bakery is everything. If you mess it up, you don't just lose the loaf, you lose the whole morning. Historians still argue whether apprentices were truly learning a trade or simply acting as unpaid laborers. In most records, they're listed as help. In truth, they were more like sleep-deprived sugar gremlins, doing half a job and sneaking licorice when your back was turned. There's a knock at the back alley door. That'll be the grocer's boy, trading you eggs for a spare heel of yesterday's bread. You oblige. He thanks you with a half bow and a wink. His face is smudged with soot, too, because in Victorian cities everything eventually turned gray, even the sky. You return to the oven and swap the front loaves for new ones. A fine sheen of sweat lines your forehead. Not glamorous sweat, just the kind that makes your shirt stick to your lower back and your apron stink like an old sponge. Another quirky tidbit for your collection. Many bakers used to test their oven heat by tossing in a small scrap of paper or flour to see how quickly it browned or combusted. If it blackened in seconds, the oven was angry. If it merely toasted, it was ready. This was before the widespread use of oven thermometers, of course. Who needs science when you have superstition and guesswork? Your apprentice finally starts sweeping, but he's mostly redistributing the ash in artistic patterns. You sigh loudly. He jumps. You feel a bit bad about that until he knocks over the water bucket and pretends it was empty anyway. Outside, a few early risers drift past. The scent of baking bread creeps into the street as an invisible advertisement that no customer can resist. Soon, the real day will begin. Housewives will show up with baskets, children with coins clenched in fists, and landlords demanding bread they never intend to pay for. But for now, there's just the rhythmic hush of rising loaves and the hiss of coal. It's strangely meditative. Or it would be, if your shoulder weren't starting to cramp and your fingers weren't tingling from dough rot. Yes, dough rot. It's a real thing. Handle wet dough for too many hours without washing your hands, and the skin begins to peel, rash, and blister. Victorian bakers wore their injuries like badges. Some even used salt water to toughen their hands. Spoiler, that just made it worse. You glance at the big wall clock. It ticks a little slower than reality, as if even time is reluctant to be here. 6 o'clock creeps up, and you've still got half a batch to finish before the deliveries begin. You take a brief pause, leaning on your pole like it's a cane. The apprentice brings you a mug of something that's trying to be tea. It tastes like rust and regret. Still, you sip it gratefully. The loaves are almost ready. The crusts bloom with little cracks, steam hissing from their golden tops. You open the oven door, face flushed with heat, and slide them out. The smell is heavenly. The rest of your life may be ash and aching joints, but this moment, this 10-second window of warm, yeasty perfection, almost makes it all worth it, until you remember the deliveries are next. You've barely had time to admire your perfect loaves before it's time to wrap them, stack them, and start hauling them out into the London streets. There's no carriage, no trolley, no bakery bike with a charming wicker basket. You, dear friend, are the delivery system. 2 arms, 2 aching feet, and a basket that feels heavier than your last 3 regrets combined. You loop your arms through the handles, the woven edges biting into your forearms. It's still early, barely past 6, but the city is stirring like a groggy beast. Horses clop past. Newspaper boys shout in prepubescent rasps. And there you are, trudging uphill with 15 loaves that smell like heaven, but weigh like bricks. This is the part nobody romanticizes about Victorian baking, the commute. Sure, baking is hard, but delivering that bread, that's its own kind of punishment. Your first stop is the home of Lady Cranford, a widow who always pays in halfpennies and unsolicited opinions. You knock gently, don't want to wake the dog, or the maid, or the sleeping wrath of the upper class, and wait. A maid eventually appears, bleary-eyed and barefoot, takes the bread without a thank you, and closes the door in your face. Classic. You mutter something polite and move on. You've still got stops at the solicitor's office, the boys' grammar school, where they call you Bready Freddy, and the corner pub that insists on a pre-breakfast loaf for its one customer who drinks at sunrise. Historians still argue whether these morning deliveries were considered part of a baker's official duty or just another unpaid expectation. In many cases, they were never recorded in wage logs, suggesting it was simply understood. You bake it, you deliver it, no matter how far, no matter the weather. And the weather today is as Victorian as it gets, drizzling, damp, and just cold enough to make you question every choice in your life. The fog clings to your clothes. Your boots squelch with each step. You think about that nice, dry bakery oven and briefly consider crawling back inside. A mainstream fact to warm your soggy soul. Victorian bakers often walked 5 to 10 miles a day delivering bread. In large towns, some hired young boys as delivery runners to help. But those boys ate half the inventory and occasionally disappeared entirely, loaves and all. So, unless you had a very trustworthy helper, or no trust left to lose, you walked. You shift the basket to your other hip. Your fingers tingle from the weight. And because this is Victorian London, a man coughing violently on a street corner reminds you of another lovely occupational hazard: tuberculosis. Oh yes, consumption. The disease of choice for poets, paupers, and peasant-class bakers like yourself. You see, all that soot you've been breathing in back at the bakery doesn't just stain your teeth. It finds cozy nooks in your lungs. Add that to chronic exhaustion, poor nutrition, and questionable hydration, and you've got yourself a winning recipe for Victorian lung soup. But never mind that now. You've made it to the boys' school, where one of the instructors, Mr. Gilweather, greets you as always with a smile and a snide comment. Bit late this morning, eh? He says, glancing at the clock behind him. You don't remind him that it's barely 7:30 and you've been up for 5 hours already. Instead, you hand over the loaves and smile your best, I'm totally fine and not considering bread-based rebellion smile. He doesn't tip. He never does. Moving on. Your apprentice catches up with you halfway down an alley, dragging a crate of rolls behind him and chewing what is definitely your missing breakfast crust. You choose not to fight that battle. Pick your wars. Another quirky tidbit: some bakers use dogs to help pull carts during deliveries. Not horses, not goats. Dogs. Usually large mutts, trained to run short urban routes with harnesses strapped to custom trolleys. But dog carts were eventually banned in London by 1840, partly for animal cruelty and partly because the dogs were better at escaping than obeying. By the time you reach the last house on your list, your arms feel like wet rope. You knock once, twice. No answer. You wait. Still nothing. Great. You lower your basket to the step and lean against a lamppost, letting the drizzle collect on your hat. Your back screams. Your knees mutter threats. And just when you think no one's coming, a tiny face peeks from behind the curtain. It's a child, maybe 6. She opens the door a crack and whispers, "Mum says to leave it on the stoop." You nod. "Tell her I'll be back Tuesday." She says she knows. And with that, the door creaks shut. You crouch slowly, carefully to place the last loaf down. Then you straighten up and sigh. And that's when it happens. A seagull, possibly the same one from last Thursday, dive bombs your head and steals a bread roll straight from your basket. You flinch, swear, glance around to see if anyone saw that. They did. You begin the trudge back to the bakery. Your apron is damp, your face is crusted with flour and bird droppings, and your arms? They no longer belong to you. You make it back by 9 a.m. just in time to restart the fires and prep the next batch. Because in this line of work, there's no finish line. Just another round of dough, another clump of ash, and the faint hope that tomorrow's loaves won't be quite so heavy. But you know they will be. You're back inside the bakehouse, your clothes soggy, your arms trembling, and your soul, well, a little flatter than it was before sunrise. The oven's still warm, but the fire needs tending, and the prep table looks like it lost a battle with a flour tornado. Welcome to round 2. The thing is, in Victorian England, baking wasn't just about bread. It was about rules. Stiff, crusty, confusing rules. How big a loaf could be. What shape should it have? What ingredients were allowed and which ones were banned, even if they tasted better? You weren't just a baker. You were a legal acrobat walking a tightrope of government expectations and customer complaints. You pull out the standard weights chart, nailed to the wall, required by law, of course. The standard white loaf must weigh exactly 4 pounds before baking and 3 pounds after. Too light. That's fraud. Too heavy. That's technically giving away product for free, and your boss doesn't pay you for generosity. And let's not forget the shape. Round, oblong, or cottage, each with its own expectations. Sell a round loaf when someone expects a flat one, and suddenly you're the scandal of the street. A mainstream historical fact. The Bread Act of 1836 attempted to regulate the weights and types of bread across England. Bakers were required to use stamped scales and could be fined or imprisoned for even minor infractions. These inspections were frequent and ruthless, especially in working-class areas where bread was the primary calorie source. You reach for the scales, heavy iron beasts chained to the table to prevent tampering. But let's be honest, everyone tampered. A thumb here, a dry crust there. Sometimes a little extra flour is packed under the pan to nudge the numbers along. You didn't mean to cheat. You just meant to survive. But the inspectors didn't care about your intentions. They cared about ounces. Historians still argue whether these rigid baking laws were about protecting public health or simply a way to control the poor. After all, bread was the one thing everyone ate. And if you control the bread, you control the people. Just ask Marie Antoinette. Actually, don't. You wipe your hands on your apron and turn to the next order. A dozen rolls for a wealthy merchant with teeth so white you suspect he's never eaten coal-blackened crust in his life. His rolls must be uniform, golden brown, and light as air, which is ironic, given how heavy his expectations are. You shape the dough, pinch the ends, and line them up like little pillows of submission. Each roll gets its own place on the tray. Each one must match the others, or you'll hear about it tomorrow, usually through a note delivered by a child with jam on their hands and a sneer in their soul. Your apprentice tries to help but mixes the salt and sugar again. For the third time this week, you inhale slowly. Remind yourself he's 12. And then suggest gently that he go clean the proving drawer, which currently smells like something a ferret abandoned. He leaves, you remeasure everything again. A quirky fact to chew on. Some bakers in the 1800s used a trick called blowing the crust. Before baking, they'd spritz a fine mist of water or even beer over the loaves to create a glossy finish. It made the bread look fresher, even if the dough had been somewhat reused. There's a reason some customers used to knock on loaves to test their truth. You open the proving drawer just to check. A warm, yeasty cloud hits your face. Inside, the next round of dough is rising, or rather trying to rise. One of the loaves has slumped to one side like it's given up on life. Another is covered in what you hope is flour and not spiderweb. You sigh. There are no days off in this profession, not for illness, not for grief, not even for holidays. Bread doesn't wait for your emotions to catch up. It rises when it rises. And if you miss that window, your whole rhythm collapses like underproofed brioche. You fix the sad loaf, redust the surface, and check the fire again. Still burning, but the coals low. You'll need more by evening, and that means a trip to the cellar, which you dread. Not because of the stairs or the rats, or the flickering lantern that dies every third step. Number you dread it, because the coal man insists on being paid in advance, and the till is currently emptier than your stomach. But that's a problem for future you. Right now, you've got crust to score. You grab your lame, a sharp little blade on a stick, and start slashing patterns into the top of the loaves. Not for decoration, mind you, for venting. Each cut helps the bread expand properly, preventing random cracks and uneven bulges. The trick is to do it quickly, confidently, and without accidentally slicing your own thumb off. You once knew a man who did. He now works in accounting. The loaves go into the oven. The apprentice, bless him, brings you a mug of lukewarm tea and a slightly stolen heel of bread. You both sit for a minute, backs against the wall, staring at the flickering orange glow like it's a campfire, and you're survivors of a flour-based apocalypse. You tell him about the time the bread inspector made you cry. He tells you about a mouse he saw in the flour bin. You both pretend that the second part didn't happen. The heat seeps into your bones. For a moment, just one, you're still. No footsteps, no deliveries, just warmth and the quiet sizzle of yeast transforming into something edible and temporary. Because in this life, every loaf is temporary, and every rule, no matter how ridiculous, must still be followed. You're back on your feet. The rolls are browning. The oven is temperamental, but behaves like a cat that's been fed, but still eyes you suspiciously. And now, just when you think things might slow down a bit, your stomach growls loud enough to startle the apprentice. Right, breakfast. Except there isn't one. You glance over at the staff shelf, a generous name for a crooked board with a chipped mug and half a dried heel of yesterday's bread. You pick it up. It's tough, stale, but edible if you dunk it in tea and don't think too hard. You chew slowly, eyes half closed, leaning against the warm bricks. It's not a meal. It's a placeholder. But it's all you've got. Which is ironic, isn't it? You spend every hour shaping food, and yet you rarely get to eat it fresh. Victorian bakers were often the last to eat and the first to starve in a bad season. Bread was for the customer. You? You got the rejects, the burned ends, or what rats hadn't claimed first. You take a sip of lukewarm tea. And then, because it's a Tuesday and fate enjoys a laugh, a sharp pinch blooms in your gut. Ah yes, our next delightful chapter, intestinal parasites. You may think this is an exaggeration. It is not. A mainstream historical fact. Due to lax hygiene and contaminated flour supplies, intestinal worms and parasites were surprisingly common among Victorian workers, especially bakers. Poor sanitation in flour mills meant everything from insect larvae to tapeworm eggs could find their way into your daily dough. Once ingested, they set up camp, often for years. So if you've been feeling a little gnawed from the inside lately, that might explain it. You scratch absently at your side and look at your flour bin with suspicion. There's a smell coming from it, a little sour, maybe a bit metallic. Not ideal, but you sift it anyway, as you always do. Remove the obvious clumps. Pick out the black specks that may or may not be beetles, and hope for the best. Historians still debate whether most bakers even noticed the contamination or had simply grown used to it. Some suggest that flour adulteration was so widespread that people no longer recognized clean flour by sight. Others argue that bakers noticed but had no other option. Hunger makes even the questionable tolerable. You call out to the apprentice to fetch fresh water. He returns 5 minutes later with a pail so full of floating mystery bits, you briefly wonder if the Thames has taken up knitting. You strain it through cloth, boil it in a dented kettle, and call it clean enough. It's not. But your standards aren't high anymore, just like your energy level. You wash your hands, though that's a generous phrase. You rinse them in the hot water and scrub with salt, an old trick meant to kill anything living, including potentially your fingerprints. Another quirky tidbit: many bakers use salt or vinegar to scrub their arms and hands raw at the end of long shifts, believing it prevented yeast sickness. In reality, it just gave them cracked, stinging skin and opened the door to more infections. Hygiene was a performance, not a practice. You flex your fingers and return to shaping loaves. The dough is sticky today, clinging like wet laundry. The air is thick and humid, bad for proofing, worse for your mood. You remember hearing a customer once say, "There's nothing so pure as bread." And you nearly laughed into your apron. Pure? This job was anything but. You've bled into dough before, coughed ash into the crust, even watched a roach disappear into a flour sack and pretended it didn't happen, because the bread has to go out. No matter what, you cut another batch, roll it out, shape it, line it up, and then the bell above the door rings. Not a customer. Worse, it's the inspector. He waddles in like a man whose shoes are too tight and whose power is too unchecked. You wipe your hands, nod, and gesture to the scales. He makes a show of checking them, like you might have suddenly forgotten how math works. He weighs 2 loaves, frowns, measures crust depth with a ruler. You suspect he only carries it to feel important. Then he picks one up, smells it, and without asking, takes a bite. You wait. He chews slowly, grimaces slightly, then nods. Satisfactory, he says, like he's granting you access to oxygen. He scribbles something on his clipboard and waddles out, muttering about substandard glazing under his breath. You exhale, your shoulders drop. You survive the visit. This time, you turn to the apprentice who's been hiding behind the sacks of flour. He peeks out. Is it safe? Safe-ish, you say. You return to the loaves. You've got to get the next round in the oven, and the heat's starting to waver. You shovel fresh coal into the fire, watching the sparks rise like angry fireflies. The flames lick the brick, and you feel the heat bloom across your face. You're sweating again, not the good kind, the sticky, unearned kind. Your gut gurgles. The tea didn't help, but still, you keep baking. Because that's the job, because this is your life, because you are a Victorian baker, and this is only halfway through the morning. By late morning, the oven's roaring again, the apprentice is sweeping in irregular circles, and your feet have developed an entirely new species of ache, somewhere between dull throb and full-on betrayal. But you can't sit. Sitting is for nobility, poets, and people who don't smell like wet dough and desperation. And you, dear baker, have reached that magical moment in the day known as the burn zone. Every exposed patch of your skin is either red, blistered, or shiny with sweat. The oven door singed your forearm about an hour ago again, and your fingers, having spent too long pressing dough into trays, are starting to puff. It's the kind of swelling you'd normally see on fruit left out in the sun too long. A mainstream historical fact, Victorian bakers commonly suffered from skin burns, scorched eyebrows, and something grimly known as baker's rash, a combination of heat exposure, flour irritation, and open wounds left untreated. The lack of protective equipment meant constant exposure to high-temperature ovens, rough kneading surfaces, and boiling kettles. It was the price of the job, and no one thought it unusual. You touch the welt on your forearm, already turning a gentle plum color. That'll sting for the rest of the week. But don't worry, your body will eventually stop bothering to register new pain. Adaptation or surrender? Historians disagree. Your shirt is soaked down the back. Not with rain this time, just sweat. And the flour has caked onto it like icing gone terribly wrong. You peel the fabric away from your neck, wincing. But you keep working. Because in this bakehouse, rest is a rumor, and comfort is the name of someone else's cat. The apprentice passes you a crooked, underfloured loaf, carrying one loaf that looks like it's been stepped on. You eye it with the mild despair of a man who has given up trying to teach geometry to a carrot. You forgot the second proof, you mutter. He looks confused. Didn't it already rise once? It's like tea, you say. You can't just dunk it once and call it done. Historians still argue whether apprentices were intentionally undertrained to keep them dependent or simply ignored because no one had the energy to care. The results were the same. Loaves with lopsided tops, dense middles, and crusts so sharp they could double as roof tiles. You fix the worst of it, reshaping the dough and adding a light dusting of flour. Then you slide the tray into the oven. The heat blasts your face, drying your eyes and curling the fine hairs along your arms. You blink slowly, feel the flush rise up your neck, and wonder, for the 20th time this week, if this job is slowly roasting you from the inside out. Another quirky tidbit. Some Victorian bakers used to test the heat of their ovens by sticking their face near the opening and gauging the temperature based on how fast their eyebrows curled. Effective? Not really. But it gave you something to measure. You check the burn mark on your wrist again. It's starting to blister. You think briefly of using the vinegar from the pantry, but the last time you tried that, the sting nearly made you swear in front of the vicar's wife. She hasn't returned since. Instead, you tie a scrap of cloth around it, old linen from a flour sack, and carry on. The pain will fade, or your awareness of it will. Outside, the city's moving faster now. You hear carts rattling down cobblestones, children chasing one another past the window, and the occasional shriek of a cat being chased by something larger and more determined. Inside, you keep shaping, keep baking, keep burning. You've got an order for honeyed rolls due by noon, an indulgence for a local politician with a sweet tooth and a sour attitude. The trick is not in the dough, but it's in the timing. The honey has to go on while the crust is still hot, but not too hot, or it caramelizes and cracks like glass. Too late, and it soaks in, turning the whole thing into a sad, sticky sponge. Your hands tremble as you reach for the jar. You drizzle carefully, sweeping the spoon with the precision of a painter working in syrup. And just as you finish the last roll, your elbow bumps the tray. The rolls teeter. They do that slow motion wobble, the kind that tells your heart to stop, just in case it hurts less when they fall. Somehow, miraculously, they don't. They settle. You let out a breath you didn't know you were holding and leaned heavily on the table. The apprentice claps. That was cool. You say nothing, but your soul quietly thanks gravity. You line up the honeyed rolls, wipe down the bench, and rub at your eyes with a floury sleeve. You need water, you need food, you need a second life. But instead, you get back to it, because more loaves are waiting, and more burns to earn, and more hours to survive. The honeyed rolls are cooling, the oven is reloaded, your hands have taken on a permanent curve, fingers curled slightly like dough hooks that forgot how to unhook. And your eyelids? They've started doing that slow, involuntary flutter, the kind of blink that lasts 4 seconds longer than you meant. It's around midday now, which for most professions might mean lunch or a chance to breathe, but not for a baker. For a baker, noon means deliveries again, and cleanup, and another round of mixing, kneading, and guessing what time it actually is based on the shape of the sunbeam slicing through the cracked window. You briefly sit on a low stool, just long enough to feel your back protest. It pops like an old chestnut. You've developed a sixth sense for when a loaf is about to burn and when an apprentice is about to break something. And sure enough, crash, there goes the sugar jar. The boy winces, holding up the broken handle. It slipped. Of course it did. You sigh, scoop the surviving sugar into a tin, and realize there's no time to mope. The landlord's man will be by shortly to collect his cut of the week's sales, whether or not there were any sales to cut. You glance at the till. A few copper pennies, a button, and a half IOU scribbled in charcoal from Mrs. Langley across the lane. Great. A mainstream historical fact. Many Victorian bakers operated on informal credit systems. Customers would pay eventually, usually in coin, sometimes in goods, and often in vague promises. Bakers, being lower-tier tradesmen, had little power to demand payment. Debtors were tolerated, grumbled about, and occasionally denied their rolls, briefly. You shove the till shut and lace up your boots again. Time to deliver another tray of loaves to the parish house. Their cook is kind. She'll usually offer tea and a biscuit. You pray she's in a generous mood today. You could drink a whole kettle. The apprentice wants to come, but you send him to mop up the sugar and remind him to scrape the ash out of the oven's belly. He salutes you with the broom and promptly drops it. Progress. You step outside. The air's thick with summer now. Humid, grimy, and full of smells. Horse sweat, spilled beer, warm cabbage. Victorian London is in full bloom. The bread is heavy on your shoulder, and your knees feel like they've been borrowed from a man twice your age and never returned. As you pass the alley near the butcher, a group of urchins calls out, "Oi, got any burnt ends?" You reach into your apron and toss them a crust. They scatter like birds, laughing. You smile despite yourself. Historians still argue whether these handouts were acts of charity or just practical waste management. Either way, bakers often had a soft spot for children who reminded them of their own empty bellies not too long ago. Plus, feeding the poor was seen as mildly virtuous, just not enough to get you out of taxes. You reach the parish house and knock. The cook opens the door, beaming. "Early today?" You don't correct her. You're never early, just less later than usual. She offers you tea and a small slab of apple pudding, last night's leftovers, still sticky and warm. You could weep. You eat it in 3 bites, burning your tongue in the process, but it's worth it. Real food, not crusts, not yesterday's scraps, something with flavor. You thank her, nod to the priest who passes by without looking up, and make your way back to the bakehouse. Your stomach has remembered what fullness feels like and immediately demands more. Too bad. That was your meal window, and it's closing fast. Another quirky tidbit. Some bakers carried tiny paper packets of salt in their aprons to taste test the dough. Really just a way to trick their bodies into thinking they were eating. Chewing plain salt was a hunger distraction for many laborers. And yes, it's just as unpleasant as it sounds. Back in the bakehouse, your apprentice has done his best to mop the sugar and succeeded mostly in creating a syrupy sludge across the floor. He looks proud. You let him have the moment. You kneel by the oven, checking the ash bed. Still hot, still glowing faintly orange in the middle. That means you've got another hour or 2 before it dips too low. You add more coal, slow and steady, and fan it to life with a cracked bellows. The embers respond with a hiss, like an old man disturbed from a nap. Your hands are trembling now, not violently, just a subtle, steady flutter. Your body's telling you something, and what it's saying is, please stop. But you don't, because the day isn't over, because the bread isn't finished, because this job doesn't have a clock out time. And if you stop moving, even for a moment too long, you might not start again. You're back at the bench, elbows deep in a fresh batch of dough that clings to your skin like swampy glue. It's warm and stubborn, refusing to come together properly. And you can already tell it's going to be one of those batches. The kind that spreads flat instead of rising proud, like a deflated dream on a baking tray. And of course, it's Sunday, or at least the tail end of it, which means, in theory, you shouldn't even be working right now. According to the Lord's Day Observance Act, baking on Sundays is technically forbidden. You're supposed to be resting, reflecting, or at the very least pretending not to work. But bread doesn't care about sermons, and neither do your customers. They want hot loaves for Sunday lunch, warm rolls for the evening roast, and buns fresh from the oven for the Monday morning breakfast rush. A mainstream historical fact. By the mid-Victorian era, laws banning Sunday baking were still enforced in some towns, though usually with a wink and a nod. bakers were often forced to do their work in secret or risk fines, while customers quietly supported the rule-breaking as long as their bread arrived warm. So here you are, quietly illegal, softly criminal, covered in flour and hoping no one reports the scent of fresh baked bread wafting from your chimney. The apprentice is humming a hymn under his breath while brushing egg glaze onto a tray of secret scones. You want to tell him to hush, but honestly, the tune is kind of soothing. You crack your knuckles. Your joints sound like splintering wood. The dough slaps loudly against the bench as you knead. The rhythmic motion has taken on the feel of prayer. Press, fold, turn. Not quite holy, but definitely sacred in its own way. You glance at the window. The street is quiet. Most families are indoors now, saying grace or carving roast beef. But a few are glancing out, casual as cats hoping to smell something sweet from your chimney. You've even caught people accidentally wandering past your back door on Sundays, hands clasped, eyes wide. "Oh, is that bread? We didn't know you were baking today," they say, with the exact tone of someone who fully intended to buy an illegal loaf the moment it emerged. Historians still argue whether Sunday baking laws were about faith, fire safety, or just the government's attempt to appear pious. Some say it was to protect workers from burnout. Others point out that bakers worked Sundays anyway, just behind closed doors and under the table. You don't know which version is true, but you do know this. When people want warm bread, they don't care what the Bible says. You move to the oven and peek inside. The fire's low. You toss in a few more coals, fanning gently. There's an art to adding fuel on Sundays, just enough to keep things warm. Not so much that someone complains about the smoke. You remember a neighbor once reported you for Sunday baking. The constable came by with a clipboard and a sigh. He took one look at your blistered hands and muttered, "Try to be less obvious next time." Then bought a loaf and walked off. That's the game. Everyone pretends it isn't happening, but no one wants to go without toast. A quirky detail worth mentioning, some bakers, wary of inspectors and nosy neighbors, began baking bread very early Sunday morning, starting before midnight and finishing before dawn. This way, they could truthfully say, "It was baked yesterday." A little time travel, courtesy of moral loopholes. You're shaping dough into small rounds now, pinching the seams and setting them on trays lined with old cloth. They'll cook faster if the oven heat stays consistent, which it won't, but you try anyway. The apprentice asks, "Is it true you can go to jail for buns?" You pause. "In theory." He considers this, eyes wide. "What about for muffins?" You laugh softly. "Only if they're really good." He nods as if this makes sense. You step away from the bench and stretch your back against the doorframe. A slow, satisfying crack rolls down your spine. Your knees are stiff. Your wrists are tight. But for a brief moment, you feel something like peace. Then a sharp knock at the back door ruins it. You freeze. The apprentice drops the egg glaze. The spoon clatters to the floor. A voice calls out, "Only me, Mr. Barnes. Just wondering if you've got any of them soft rolls ready." You open the door a crack. It's old Mrs. Penwhistle from across the street, wrapped in a shawl, looking like she just happened to be passing by in the exact way someone doesn't just happen to pass by at all. You sigh and hand her a half-dozen rolls wrapped in cloth. She grins. "Bless you, love. The Lord sees the work of honest hands." And just like that, your criminal career continues. You shut the door and return to the oven. The apprentice exhales like he's just dodged a firing squad. You tell him to sweep the flour near the door. He nods. Another batch goes in, and the day goes on. Because even on a Sunday, especially on a Sunday, someone wants a warm loaf. And you, the quiet rebel with a soot-lined apron, are the one who makes it. The afternoon sun slips sideways now, angling through the high, grimy window and lighting up the bakehouse like an interrogation room. Dust floats in the rays like a secret you forgot to hide. You're on your knees, scraping the floorboards with a flat-edged knife, trying to dislodge a dried clump of dough that's older than your apprentice and twice as stubborn. And then your nose twitches. Smoke. You lift your head slowly like a man sensing incoming doom and look toward the oven. A fine gray wisp curls out from the side of the door. Oh no. You throw the knife aside and rush over, yanking open the heavy iron door. A wave of heat slaps your face, but it's not the usual warm embrace. It's angry. The loaves inside? The edges are starting to blacken. The tops are rising unevenly, one cracking like a volcano mid-eruption. This is how it starts. The great baker's fear. Fire. A mainstream historical fact. For much of the 18th and 19th centuries, bakers were considered public fire hazards. Their ovens, built into cramped wooden buildings, were notorious for sparking house fires. Some cities had entire insurance brackets just for bakehouses, and many a baker's name appears in the early London Fire Brigade's logbooks. In fact, the Great Fire of London in 1666 famously blamed on a baker. Poor chap probably just wanted a biscuit. You grab the iron peel and start rescuing loaves, working fast but gently. You slide the worst of them onto the stone bench, muttering apologies to their charred crusts. The middle batch is salvageable. The back, not so much. You might be able to pass them off as extra crusty, if the customer is half blind and extremely forgiving. The apprentice appears behind you, eyes wide, holding a bucket of water. You bark. Not water, not yet. Historians still argue whether more fires were started by ovens or by well-meaning apprentices dousing embers that should have been left alone. Water on a hot brick? A great way to crack the oven, and then you're not baking anything for weeks. You instead toss a handful of coarse salt into the coals, a trick passed down from your last master. It cuts the flame just enough, dulling the smoke. You close the iron door and prop it slightly with a damp cloth. Control the oxygen, starve the flare. You stand back, wiping sweat from your temple. That was close, too close. This oven is old, temperamental, and if it ever truly flares up, it won't be the bakehouse that burns. It'll be the whole row of buildings. You've seen it before. 10 years back, a place in Spitalfields went up like a paper lantern. The baker escaped with burns and a soot-black dog tucked under his arm. The landlord, less lucky. And yet, the city keeps trusting bakers with fire because someone's got to keep the loaves coming. You check the damage. A few loaves are crisp beyond hope. You set them aside for tomorrow's stew. Customers who can't afford fresh bread will buy them for pennies, soak them in broth, pretend they were never burned at all. Another quirky tidbit. In some Victorian households, burned bread was believed to clean the stomach and was actually sought after. Charcoal crusts were eaten as a form of folk medicine, especially for children with upset bellies. So really, you're not a failed baker today. You're a healer. You tell yourself that anyway. The apprentice helps you clear the trays. He's shaken, so are you. But you don't say it out loud. There's no room for fear here, only smoke, soot, and an unspoken truce between you and the oven. You prop open the back door to let the room breathe. The summer air outside is hardly refreshing. It's thick with coal smoke from other chimneys, sewage stench from the gutter, and the tang of hot metal from the blacksmith next door. But at least it's moving. You wash your hands in the basin, really just a tin bowl with warmish water and a rag that hasn't been cleaned since last winter. Your burns sting, and you wince as the water seeps into the broken skin. But you don't stop. The pain is familiar now. Not good, but known. The apprentice speaks up. Have you ever had a real fire? Like a big one? You nod. Once, long ago, lost 2 weeks of work and 3 good customers. He looks horrified. Did it smell bad? You glance around at the scorched crusts, the blackened brick, the damp cloth now hissing quietly under the oven door. Not as bad as losing your shop, you say. There's a quiet moment between you. The kind where even the dough seems to rise slower. You step outside for a minute, just a breath. The street is golden now, sun cutting sideways through the smog, bouncing off wet cobbles. Somewhere, someone plays a violin off key. A dog barks, a door slams, life continues. And you, soot-covered, half-burned, emotionally toasted, you stand in the alley, hands on hips, watching your shadow stretch across the brick. This is your kingdom. Crumbling, cramped, occasionally aflame, but still standing. You go back inside, because tomorrow you'll do it all again. And the oven will still be hungry. Evening creeps in with the stealth of a pickpocket. Subtle. But suddenly, everything feels different. The bakehouse is dimmer now, lit mostly by the orange flicker of the coals and a gas lamp that hums faintly in protest. Outside, the city cools into shadows. But inside these flour-dusted walls, the air is still thick and warm, still heavy. You should be winding down. Any reasonable trade would be. But of course, you're not in a reasonable trade, because now it's time for the leftover shift. This is the part of the day where you scavenge the odds and ends, misshapen rolls, ends of dough, cracked crusts, burnt buns. None of them will sell at full price. But with a bit of charm and a cloth wrap, they'll go to market tomorrow, or to the boarding house down the road, or to the neighbors who pretend they're doing you a favor by taking the extra. You gather them into baskets, fingers moving on instinct now, past the point of thought. 1, 2, 3, 10 rolls, 7 broken biscuits, half a tray of scones that never quite rose. There'll be something tomorrow. Bread pudding maybe, or croutons, or simply softer when dipped in stew. And then comes the moment you've been quietly dreading cleanup. You grab the broom, the stiff one made from twigs, not the newer bristle version you can't afford. The floor is coated in a cocktail of ash, flour, dough scrapings, and the powdered outline of a loaf that died young. You sweep in slow, deliberate motions. The dust rises like a ghost. You cough into your sleeve. A mainstream historical fact: Victorian bakehouses had notoriously poor ventilation. With open ovens, coal fires, and no proper chimneys in many cases, the air quality was atrocious. Respiratory illnesses, especially baker's asthma, were so common they were simply considered part of the job. Cleanup didn't fix it. It just spread the problem into the air. Your eyes water, your back tightens, but still you sweep. You hear the apprentice behind you singing softly to himself as he scrubs trays with a metal brush. He's out of tune, wildly, but you don't correct him. You remember when you sang once, before your voice went hoarse from flour dust and shouting through oven doors. Now you mostly hum or sigh in key. You check the proven drawer again. Empty, finally. You wipe down the workbench, each stroke lifting another layer of embedded crust. You'll never get it clean. Not truly. There's a permanent ghost of every loaf ever kneaded here, baked into the grain of the wood. You stretch slowly, feeling the crunch in your spine. It's a sound you've come to recognize. Half warning, half surrender. And then you catch it. The smell. Not smoke, not yeast, not sweat. But you. You lift your arm and give a discreet sniff. Oh dear, it's not just body odor, it's something deeper. The scent of days-old flour stuck in your cuffs, coal soot in your hair, and a base note of oven. Because here's the truth no one tells you. You smell like yeast. Always, it clings to you. Your skin, your clothes, your hair, even your bed sheets start to smell faintly fermented if you've had a long week. And let's be honest, every week is a long week. A quirky tidbit. Victorian bakers often had their own unmistakable scent. Not unpleasant, necessarily just bready. Women in boarding houses would sometimes complain about the baker's musk if one moved in upstairs. And some children could recognize their father by smell alone when he came home from the shop. You towel off your face with a rag that's more theory than fabric now. You should wash, really. But you're too tired. And honestly, what's the point? You'll be covered in flour again in 6 hours. The apprentice sits on the floor now, back against the wall, arms folded. You should scold him. There's still sweeping to do. The ash pan needs emptying. The counters need wiping. But you don't say a word. You just lower yourself onto the stool and close your eyes. For 1 second, 2, and then knock, knock, knock. You don't move. Knock, knock, knock. Mr. Barnes? A voice calls through the back door. You sigh. Stand. Your knees crack. Your soul sighs harder. You open the door. It's a neighbor holding a coin in a linen bag. Any of that crusty rye left? You nod. Walk back in. Pull the last dark loaf from the shelf. Wrap it gently. She hands you the coin. You nod again. No words needed. She leaves. You shut the door. That was your last sale of the day. Or so you think, because in a few minutes, someone else will knock. Maybe it'll be a boy with a handkerchief of coins. Maybe it'll be the landlord's wife pretending to borrow a biscuit. Maybe it'll be no one. But you'll be here, still warm, still flour-covered, still smelling like yeast. Because you are a baker. And this bakehouse doesn't sleep. It just waits. It's late now. Not just evening late, but London after lanterns late. The kind of hour where the city's noises have settled into a quieter hum, coal carts rolling slowly, footsteps echoing down alleys, the distant bark of a dog too stubborn to go to bed. Inside your bakehouse, it's a different kind of quiet. Not peaceful, just paused. You lean against the wall, arms crossed over your apron, which by now looks like it's been through a flour storm and then used to wrestle a chimney sweep. Your body aches in new places, elbow, the lower back, that one spot under your left rib that always flares up when you've been standing for more than 15 hours. And you have. The apprentice is curled up near the flour sacks, one arm flung over his eyes like he's shielding them from the reality of the world. You think about waking him, but honestly, he looks better there than you feel sitting up. You close your eyes for just a moment, and then you hear it. A scurry, tiny, fast, and unmistakably familiar. You open one eye, then the other. There, darting across the corner near the proving drawer, is a rat. Not your first, not your worst, Probably not even your least favorite. You sigh. Not tonight. The rat freezes, sniffs, then vanishes back into the shadows. A mainstream historical fact. Rats were practically part of the staff in Victorian bakeries, with warm walls, constant crumbs, and storage bins of flour and grain. Bakehouses were rodent heaven. Most bakers developed a kind of grumbling tolerance. Some even named them. Nibbles, Queenie, Lord Squeak. You grab the broom and tap it once on the floor. A half-hearted warning. Nothing more. You're not chasing rats tonight. You're too tired to hate anything smaller than a loaf. You return to the bench and start wiping it down, pushing flour into little piles with the heel of your hand. You find a raisin under your elbow. You have no memory of working with raisins today. Another quirky tidbit. Because so many ingredients were stored in open sacks or unsealed jars, Victorian bakers often had guest ingredients in their loaves, mouse droppings, insect shells, even bits of fabric. The worst were quietly tossed. The acceptable ones were just baked in. You finish wiping and turn to the coal scuttle. One last task, prepping the morning fuel. The scuttle is low. You carry it to the back, where the coal is stored in a lean-to that leans more with each passing season. It creaks as you open the door. A lantern hangs from a rusty hook, casting just enough light to make the shadows seem deeper. You shovel quietly. One scoop, two. Your hands are stained black by the third, and the dust clings to your shirt like it's been waiting all day to do so. You return inside, dump the coal into its bin by the oven. The sound echoes more than it should in the silence, and then a small sound behind you. The apprentice. He's half awake, blinking blearily. Did I miss something? No, you say. You're fine. He yawns so hard his jaw cracks. Do we have any of that bread from earlier? The ones with the sugar tops? You check the shelf. One remains. You break it in half and hand him a piece. He eats it with reverence. You eat yours more slowly. The sugar has melted slightly into the crust. It's stale at the edges, but still good, still sweet. He finishes, then mumbles, My mom used to say if you dream about bread, it means you're hungry. You glance at the oven still warm. Then I guess I'll never stop dreaming, you say. He nods, curls up again near the flour sacks. You rinse your hands one last time. The water is tepid. The cloth is useless. You dry them on your apron anyway. Historians still argue whether bakehouses were places of community or quiet despair. There are stories of songs shared over dough, laughter rising with the steam, a kind of camaraderie among the weary. But there are also records of letters, journals, quiet admissions of men and women breaking down mid-need, hiding their tears in bins of flour. Because no one had the time or energy to ask, Are you all right? You don't cry. But you understand the impulse. You walk slowly through the bakehouse, checking locks, tightening shutters, brushing crumbs into the cracks where they'll wait for morning. And just before you snuff the lantern, you whisper to the oven, Don't misbehave tonight. It creaks, as if amused. You leave it glowing. Not because it needs to, but because you'll need it again in a few hours. The lantern is out. The last light in the bakehouse is the soft orange pulse of the oven's coals, still breathing faintly after a day of roaring, blistering work. You're perched on a stool, elbows on your knees, hands caked with dried flour, and a body that's more ache than flesh at this point. And now you're asking yourself a familiar question. Do I even bother going home tonight? The answer, as usual, is no. Going home would mean peeling yourself off this stool, changing into clothes that somehow smell even more like bread than your work clothes do, and walking across half the city through muddy alleys and flickering gaslight. You'd have to climb 4 flights of stairs to a shared attic room above a fishmonger's, where the walls weep damp, the mattress sags like wet dough, and your flatmates argue loudly about who left the soap in the soup pot again. No, thank you. This bench, it may be splintered, but at least it's warm. The apprentice stirs from his corner near the flour sacks, eyes half-lidded, voice thick with sleep. Are we sleeping here again? You pause, consider. You think of last winter, the night you tried going home through freezing rain, only to slip on the slick cobblestones, soak your trousers through, and arrive to find the window smashed and your bedding damp with ice. You ended up sleeping in the kitchen chair anyway. Yeah, you say. We're sleeping here. It's not unusual. In fact, it's practically tradition. Many Victorian bakers slept in their shops, not just because of long hours, but because it made sense. The oven stayed warm. The air, though dusty and thick, was better than the freezing damp outside. And the loaves, after all, waited for no man. You peel off your apron and hang it by the door. Fold an old flour sack and lay it on the bench like a pillow. It does little to soften the wood, but the gesture helps make the space feel less like a workshop, more like a refuge. From the corner, you hear a rustle. Your heart sinks a little. You already know what it is. A rat. Small, fast, and entirely unbothered by your presence, it darts out from under the proving bench, scampers across the floor like it's clocking in for its own shift, and disappears behind the sugar bin. You sigh. Not even angry, just too tired. You rap the broom handle once against the floor. A warning more symbolic than effective. The rat doesn't reappear. Not tonight. You return to your bench, wiping it down with the corner of your sleeve. You find a currant stuck under your elbow. You're not even sure if you used currants today. Another day, another ghost ingredient. You glance over at the apprentice. He's already curled up in his sack bed, arms tucked in, feet sticking out awkwardly. He'll grow out of that corner eventually. Or maybe just learn to fold smaller. You grab the coal scuttle, your last job of the day. You step outside into the coal shed, where the damp air hits your skin like a wet towel. You scoop carefully, quietly, letting the weight of the coal steady your thoughts. 1 shovel, 2, enough to keep the fire breathing through the early hours. Back in the bakehouse, you pour it gently into the side bin by the oven. It lands with a low, rustling crunch, not loud enough to wake the boy. You kneel, brush your hands on your trousers. They're already black with soot. You stare at the oven door. Still warm, still glowing, still alive. You settle yourself back on the bench, spine curling automatically into a shape molded by years of doing this. Your back cracks 1, then twice. You exhale, let your head tilt back. The ceiling above is low and dark, the beams rough and splintered. You know every groove, every nail, every place the plaster has crumbled. One of the knots looks like Queen Victoria if she were carved by a half-blind carpenter with a grudge. You've never told anyone that. Your eyes flutter closed, and still, your mind is racing. Tomorrow's orders, the flour shipment, that one customer who insists on airier crusts but doesn't actually know what that means. Whether the egg crate will survive the walk from the market, whether the fire will stay steady, whether the dough will rise, whether you shift. Something in your hip clicks. Your hands folded on your chest, still smell faintly of yeast and smoke. You open one eye. The oven's light is dim now, more ember than flame. The apprentice mumbles something in his sleep. You hear the word muffins, followed by a snort. You smile for a moment, then bang, you shoot upright. The boy jolts awake, eyes wide. What was that? You listen. Wind, just the wind. A shutter slapping against the wall outside. No fire, you whisper, just the wind. He nods and curls back up. Within moments, he's snoring. You exhale, long and slow. Your ribs ache. Your breath is shallow. But your heart, despite everything, is calm. You lie back down. Fold your arms. Close your eyes again. A final quirky detail floats through your mind before sleep takes hold. Some people in the city believe bakers have bread dreams, that the smell of dough becomes so much a part of you that even your thoughts rise like loaves, sweet and heavy. Maybe it's true, because right now, in this warm little room filled with ash and flower ghosts and the faint heartbeat of fire, you feel it too. Sleep, rising, slow and soft and inevitable. The world outside stirs long before the sun shows its face. You feel it first in your bones how the warmth from the oven has faded into something cooler, something less forgiving. The air bites now, dry and brittle. And your back, oh, your back. You stretch slowly, like an old tree waking up in the middle of a storm, and feel every inch of your spine complain about your life choices. Beside you, the apprentice is still asleep, mouth open, a crumb stuck to his cheek. You envy him for about half a second, then remember he'll be the one scraping burnt crust off trays in an hour. Justice will be served. You stand. You don't spring up. You rise the way a dough rises slowly, uneven, uncertain whether it's ready. Your feet hit the stone floor with a dull slap, and you take the first steps of the day in a room that feels more like a memory than a space. Still, it's home, at least for now. First things first, the oven. It's not out, thank heavens, but it's sulking. You open the iron door and crouch in close, letting the old heat roll over your face. The coals are slumped into themselves, like they've had the same shift you did. You prod them gently. Whisper something encouraging under your breath. Then add a small scoop of fresh coal, slow, steady, like feeding an animal that doesn't trust you yet. A mainstream historical fact. Victorian bakers often rose around 2 or 3 a.m. to restart their fires, as ovens took hours to reach baking temperature. And if they cooled too much overnight, the morning's entire batch could be ruined. Fire wasn't just heat, it was currency. As the oven crackles back to life, you begin the morning ritual. Flour your hands, stretch your fingers, touch the dough. Ah, yes, the sponge. The preferment mix you set late yesterday, now bubbling with little holes like it's trying to breathe. Good sign. That means it lived through the night. You scoop it out into the mixing trough. It squelches softly, a doughy sigh of recognition. Your hands are back in motion before you even think. Add flour, add salt. A splash of lukewarm water from the kettle balanced near the oven wall all night. Then knead, and knead, and knead. The dough fights back today. It's tight, resistant like a cat that doesn't want to be picked up. You press harder, fold, turn. Let your weight guide your hands. This is muscle memory now. You could do it in your sleep. You did do it in your sleep once. The apprentice never lets you forget. You glance over. He's stirring, sitting up slowly, hair wild, eyes crusty. A little lump of flour was clinging to his nose. He looks around, sees you working, and groans. All ready? You nod, not breaking your rhythm. Time to sweep too. Soon, he collapses back onto the flour sack. You let him have 3 more minutes, no more. The dough begins to change. It stops fighting, starts stretching, starts responding. You feel the shift, like a mood improving or a child finally listening. Historians still argue whether Victorian bread was truly better than what came after industrialization. Some say yes because it was alive, touched, listened to, and felt. Others argue no because the conditions were dirty, the measurements imprecise, and the additives questionable at best. The truth, as always, is somewhere in between. It wasn't perfect, but it was yours. You split the dough into smaller rounds. The apprentice stumbles over and starts greasing the pans. Clumsily, he drops one. You pretend not to notice. You roll, shape, and tuck each loaf with care. Not because anyone will thank you, but because the bread deserves it. Bread, of all things, responds best to dignity. A quirky tidbit. Some bakers swore their dough could feel their mood. Angry hands made dense loaves. Gentle hands, soft ones. Superstition? Maybe. But after enough years, you start to wonder. You start to believe your dog knows you. The room warms again as the oven stretches its limbs. The stone floor glows a soft orange. You both fall into a rhythm now, like a dance, like a hymn. No words, just the music of motion, the scrape of trays, the slap of dough, the soft breath of rising heat. You look at the clock. Almost time. The loaves are proofing now, covered under cloth, rising like promises. You sip a bit of tea, barely warm, slightly bitter, and lean against the table. The apprentice is buttering a tray for the first batch. He hums a tune. The same one his mother sang when she dropped him off here months ago. Too young and too thin. He's grown, still clumsy, but stronger now. You hand him a roll from yesterday, one of the few that didn't burn. Breakfast, you say. He smiles. You glance toward the front door. Soon the customers will come. The first knock, the shuffle of coins, the complaints, the not enough crust, the too dark, the is this yesterday's? But for now, the loaves rise in quiet. The fire burns steadily. And in this moment, just this one, you feel almost human again. The moment doesn't last. It never does. A dull knock on the back door ends the quiet 3 firm raps. Too early to be a customer, and too casual to be an inspector. You know that knock. You dread that knock. It's him, the landlord's man. You wipe your hands on your apron and glance at the apprentice, who instantly pretends to be deeply invested in arranging a tray of rolls. You open the door. There he stands, sharp as a tack and just as warm. Black coat, thinning hair slicked back, a little notebook in one hand, and a smile that doesn't quite reach his eyes. "Morning, Mr. Barnes," he says. "Hope the fire's been treating you kindly." You grunt something halfway between a greeting and a warning. He steps inside uninvited, sniffing the air like a man checking for evidence. "Smells like a good batch today," he says, eyeing the trays. "And yet, I hear you were late with rent this week." You don't answer. You just walk to the till and open it. 5 coins, 2 coppers, a button, a folded note from Mrs. Langley, promising a payment after Michaelmas. You hand over what you have. He clicks his tongue, scribbles in his notebook, and sighs theatrically. "I'll be back next week, with interest. Don't make me bring someone less conversational." Then he's gone, just like that. No goodbye, just the smell of shoe polish and pressure in his wake. You shut the door harder than necessary. The apprentice flinches. A mainstream historical fact. Victorian landlords had immense power over tenants. especially tradespeople. Bakers often lived above or behind their shops. And if they couldn't pay rent, eviction could happen with barely a day's notice. Some landlords would seize tools, ovens, or even sacks of flour in lieu of payment. Debt was not just financial. It was a weapon. You sit for a moment, just long enough to feel the weight settle into your chest. Then back to it, because the bread won't wait, and neither will the line that's already forming outside the front door. The apprentice peeks through the curtain. There's a lady with a parasol tapping her shoe. You nod. He opens the shop window, and so it begins. The first customer of the day always sets the tone. Today, it's Mrs. Penwhistle. Again. She looks you over like you're a misbehaving footman, then gestures to the fresh loaves. The last one was too chewy, she says. Do try better. You pass her a warm cottage loaf. She sniffs it like she's judging a wine, then drops coins into your hand without counting. You don't check either. Not worth the trouble. Behind her comes a boy with a penny and a dream, and then a coughing tailor, and then the twins from down the road who always demand the one with the crackly top. You don't have it today. They sulk dramatically and leave with a crusty roll each. You've learned not to take it personally. The line moves. Hands exchange coins for crust. Words are short. Smiles are rarer. And through it all, you and the apprentice work in tandem, passing, wrapping, slicing, lifting, nodding. The dough you proofed earlier has doubled, ready for the next round. You divide it, shape it, and press it into pans. No time to rest, no time to think. The apprentice nudges you. You forgot to mark this one, he says, pointing to an unscored loaf. You blink. He's right. You grab the lame, cut 2 swift lines across the top. The dough sighs in relief. Historians still argue whether the score on Victorian bread was purely functional or also symbolic. Some say bakers used it to identify their work. Others say it helped steam escape. But for you, it's something else. A gesture, a signature, proof that you were here, that you made this. The oven is hot again. Too hot, maybe. You adjust the damper and slide in the tray. The blast of heat licks your cheeks. You don't flinch anymore. Your skin's used to it. The room smells like home now. Not just to you, but to the dozen people waiting outside. Warm air seeps into the street, drawing in customers like moths to a golden flame. Another quirky tidbit. In poorer districts, children would follow the scent of bread, down alleys to bakeries, noses high, eyes closed. Some would wait hours for scraps. Others would run errands in exchange for a crust. The smell of baking wasn't just marketing, it was hope. The line thins out. You've sold most of what you baked. A few rolls remain. One dented loaf. Some crumbs on the counter. The apprentice leans against the wall. That was fast. You nod, mopping your brow with a sleeve that only spreads the sweat around. You sit. You sip the dregs of tea. And you breathe. There's dough rising again. Deliveries to prep. Coal to fetch. But for just a few minutes, the world is still. And in that stillness, you remember why you endure it all. Not for glory, not for gold, but for this simple, strange, steady rhythm of hands and heat and hunger. The silence doesn't last. It never does. You've barely finished your last sip of tea before the bell above the back door jingles softly, apologetically, like even it knows you've had enough for one day. This time, it's a delivery boy, skinny, mud on his knees. The cap is too big for his head. He holds out a folded scrap of paper with urgent, 24 by 3 p.m., scrawled in a hand you recognize immediately. Mrs. Featherington, the neighborhood matron with a fondness for lemon buns and last-minute crises. You sigh, not a tired sigh, an accepting one. Of course she needs 2 dozen. Of course it's last minute. Of course she expects them with icing. You glance at the clock. It's just past noon. The dough from this morning has had its first rise, and it's looking forgiving. Software willing to play along if you treat it right. The apprentice peers over your shoulder. Do we have lemons? No, you say. But we have vinegar, stale honey, and a tiny amount of optimism. That'll do. A mainstream historical fact. Victorian bakers were masters of substitution. Out of eggs, use stale ale and extra kneading. No lemons. Mix sugar and tart cider. They didn't just bake, they improvised. Constantly, endlessly, creatively. It wasn't about luxury, it was survival disguised as skill. You dust your hands and divide the dough into rounds. The apprentice begins lining trays with buttered cloth. He's getting faster now, more confident. Less dough on his elbows today, which you take as a win. As you work, the back door swings open again. This time it's your flour man, a thick-armed fellow named Joe with sawdust in his beard and the patience of a saint. He drops 2 fresh sacks near the bin, grunts, and holds out his ledger. You owe him. You always owe him. You write next Monday and hope your eyes look more convincing than your handwriting. He shrugs, gives the apprentice a wink, and disappears out the door like fog. You hoist one of the sacks, 140 pounds of what is hopefully flour, and not, as happened once, a suspicious mixture of barley husks and pebbles. You remember that week. You had to sift by hand, and one loaf cracked a customer's tooth. She still shops here. You don't ask why. You prep the lemonish buns. The icing is a mixture of old powdered sugar, cooled syrup, and what you swear is just a hint of actual lemon zest, though you're not sure if it's real or imagined. They bake quickly, golden and sweet smelling, and for a moment, the bakery smells like summer. The apprentice sneaks one. You let him. He deserves it today. Another quirky tidbit. Some Victorian bakeries deliberately overbaked 1 or 2 buns in each tray, just so apprentices or staff could eat without feeling guilty. It was an unspoken rule that if it's too crisp to sell, it's fair game. You'd be amazed how many accidentally overcooked buns occurred on days when bellies were emptier than usual. You box the order, tie the string, send it off with the same boy who brought the note, now a little richer, a little stickier, and carrying a box that weighs more than his complaints. The shop quiets again. You feel the lull in your limbs. But then, the clock strikes 1. And just like that, the afternoon customers arrive. Mothers with prams, boys with bent pennies, a man with a limp and a deep craving for rye. They drift in slowly, softly, each with a story, each with a need. You fulfill them, one by one, quietly, methodically, kindly, when you can. The apprentice handles a sale alone, doesn't fumble the change. You don't say anything. But your silence is louder than praise. Historians still argue whether Victorian bakers saw themselves as craftsmen or service workers. Were they artists of the oven, or simply providers of fuel for the hungry? The truth, perhaps, is both, and neither. Bakers simply were. Always there, always warm, always rising and falling with the dough. Mid-afternoon light filters through the high windows now. It's softer than morning, a little gold, a little dusty. The scent in the air has shifted too, less urgent, more content. You lean against the wall for a moment, watching the apprentice mop a spill near the counter. He's whistling, off-key, but cheerful. You remember being his age. You remember thinking bread was just flour and water. You smile. Another customer walks in. You recognize her, Miss Liddy, from 2 streets over. Always buys 1 roll, always exact change, never speaks more than 2 words. Today she hands you a small parcel. For you, she says. Inside is a jar, plum jam, homemade. You're stunned. You nod your thanks. She smiles barely and slips away. You stare at the jar. And for the first time today, you sit down. Not to collapse, but to eat. You spread the plum jam on a warm heel of bread, just thick enough to feel luxurious, just thin enough to make it last. It bleeds into the crust, purple and sweet, and for a few quiet bites, you remember what it feels like to eat something made for pleasure rather than fuel. The apprentice watches you from across the room. He looks half curious, half hopeful. You break the rest of the slice in 2 and toss him the bigger half. He catches it, barely. No chewing with your mouth open, you say. He does. Of course he does. But you let it slide, because in this moment, you're not just a baker and a boy. You're 2 humans, sitting in a room that smells like scorched sugar and drying yeast, sharing plum jam like it's treasure. The day moves on. Bread doesn't care about jam or small mercies. There's another batch to shape, a new round to score, deliveries to wrap. You're working again, hands sticky with dough, shoulders aching, eyes blinking against the flour dust, when the door creaks open once more. This time it's a woman you've never seen. She's tall. A worn shawl was pulled tight around her shoulders. She holds a baby with 1 arm, and with the other, she sets down 2 coins on the counter. I need bread, she says, voice low. Anything. You glance at the shelves. Just 1 loaf left. A dense, overproofed rye you were going to save for stew. You push it toward her without counting the coins. She picks them up again. Next time, she says, and turns to go. You don't stop her. A mainstream historical fact. In working-class Victorian neighborhoods, bakers were often the last line between hunger and starvation. Many gave away crusts, day-olds, even broken loaves when times were lean. Not for charity, not for show, just because that's what you did. You fed people. The apprentice looks at you. You always do that, you shrug. Bread's cheap, you say. Dignity isn't. He thinks about that, then goes back to scrubbing trays. Later, you clean the flour bin. It's nearly empty. The new sacks sit waiting, but you haven't opened them yet. There's a rhythm to this moment, sweeping out the remnants, tracing your fingers across the fine dust that clings to the corners, remembering the thousands of loaves that pass through your hands. You lift the bin lid and pause. Inside, something catches your eye. White, fine, but too light, too powdery. You pinch a bit between your fingers, rub it, taste, then you swear, alum, again. You march to the back shelf and haul down the new sack of flour. Cut it open, scoop a handful, same texture, same bitter taste. The miller's been cutting again, padding weight with chalk and alum powder to stretch profits and cheat the scales. A quirky fact that's a little harder to laugh at. During the Victorian era, flour was frequently adulterated with everything from ground bone to alum, a substance that made bread whiter, denser, and longer lasting, but at a cost. It caused stomach cramps, digestive issues, and even long-term organ damage. Many poor families blamed the baker, never knowing the poison came from farther up the chain. You sit with the knowledge for a long minute. Then you rise, pour the sack out, every last grain. Dust flies up in a soft white cloud that stings your eyes. The apprentice chokes. Is it bad? It's not bread, you mutter. It's plaster in a bag. You both work silently for the next hour, cleaning, replacing, and wiping down every surface like it's infected. Because in a way it is. Trust, once tainted, is hard to knead back into shape. By mid-afternoon, your arms are trembling, not from panic, just fatigue. Your fires burn low, your coal bins half empty, and your shelves, for once, are completely clean. You lean against the doorframe and stare out into the alley. It's quiet now. The city has shifted into its late-day rhythm. Fewer carts, longer shadows. The slow return of workers from factory and field. You smell meat roasting somewhere. Laundry hanging from windows. Smoke curling from chimneys. You're not thinking of bread anymore. You're thinking of resting. But there's one task left. You pick up the apprentice's ledger, his clumsy notes, his misspelled names, his crooked sketches of buns and rolls. He started tracking how long each bake takes, how different flours behave. He's even drawn a tiny crown on the page labeled Best Crust. You close the book, pat his shoulder. You did well today. He looks startled, then pleased. You too, he says. It's almost funny. But you take the compliment. And in the final light of the day, you both sit down, just for a moment, not to collapse, but to pause, together. Evening again. The second one today, it feels like. You blink at the same beam of light stretching across the same dusty window, only it's longer now, softer. The sun's retreating. And yet you haven't sat still for more than a breath since it rose. You're cleaning the counter now. Slowly. Deliberately. Not because you have to, but because it gives your hands something to do while your mind drifts. The apprentice has dozed off on a sack of flour, arms crossed under his head like a pillow. There's flour in his hair, flour on his boots, flour on his eyebrows. He looks like a ghost someone forgot to finish sketching. You let him sleep. He's earned it. You haven't said it aloud, not once. But you're starting to realize he might actually stay. Most don't. Most boys last a few weeks, burn themselves, cry in secret, then vanish back to the streets or the stables. But this one, he's lasted. He's learned. He's still here. You find yourself thinking of your own first shop, or what passed for one. A crooked room with a borrowed oven and a leaking ceiling. You slept beside a sack of salt for a year. You burnt everything for the first month. You nearly lost a finger to the protruding drawer hinge, but you made it, somehow. A mainstream historical fact. Many Victorian bakers were once apprentices themselves, often starting as early as age 10 or 12. It was a life passed down, not because it was glorious, but because it was possible. Bread meant survival. And the bakehouse, for all its heat and hardship, offered at least one door that didn't close entirely. You run your hand across the wooden bench. Smooth, worn, deeply familiar. There are burn marks here, knife scars, an old ink stain from a ledger spill that never quite came out. This bench has seen more of your life than any one person ever has. Outside, the shadows grow longer. A few stragglers pass the window, shoemakers heading home, a constable tipping his hat, the same cat that visits your doorstep at twilight each day just to judge you. The shop is quiet now, and that's when it comes. The knock, software hesitant. You glance at the door. For a moment you consider ignoring it, but that's not your way. You wipe your hands, straighten your spine, and open up. It's a child, maybe 9 years old, thin. The clothes are too big. eyes wide and shining with a hunger he's trying very hard not to show. He says nothing, just holds out a single coin, a farthing, worn thin. You say nothing either. Just walk to the shelf, take the last heel of rye, wrap it in paper and hand it to him, and he doesn't smile, just nods and runs. You watch him disappear into the evening and then close the door. A quirky fact: in Victorian London, some bakers kept a mercy shelf, a small space where unsold bread was left overnight, free for the taking. No signs, no announcements, just a silent permission. It was illegal, and it saved lives. You think about that now. You walk to the shelf, place 2 crusts there, just in case. The apprentice stirs. What time is it? Late, you say. He groans and stretches, wincing like a man twice his age. Did we sell out? Almost, he nods. Tomorrow again? Always. You toss him a rag to wipe his hands. Then you both set to work resetting the shop, folding clothes, scraping trays and stacking tins. You move without speaking. You've done it so many times, the rhythm is baked into your bones. And when it's done, you sit again. You pour 2 cups of tea, lukewarm, bitter, perfect. You sip in silence. Then the apprentice asks, "Do you ever want to stop?" The question lands with more weight than it should. You think about it. Think about all the years, the sweat, the blisters, the soot in your lungs, the customers who don't say thank you, the inspectors who never smile, the nights you've gone to sleep standing, and then you think about the bread. The way dough feels when it finally gives in, the warmth of the oven after a rainstorm, the smell of the crust breaking just right, the boy in the doorway with the farthing, the apprentice who stayed. You take another sip of tea and answer truthfully, "No," he nods, "me neither." You don't say anything more. You just sit there. 2 bakers in a room full of ghosts and flour and the soft hum of a sleeping oven. And outside, the night falls gently, not with silence, but with peace. The sky outside has turned from gold to blue to something darker, inky, speckled with chimney smoke and stars, barely visible through the smog. It's late now. The kind of late where even the rats are settling down and the street lamps flicker more than they shine. Inside, the oven gives off its last quiet heat. You and the apprentice sit shoulder to shoulder near the back wall, sipping the last of the lukewarm tea. You can't feel your feet. Your knees ache like old hinges. But for the moment, you're still, anchored. You both stare at the counter. It's bare. Not a roll, not a crust, not even a crumb. It's the rarest kind of day, a clean sellout. You try not to smile too much. The apprentice does. He's grinning so wide it looks like it hurts. "We did it," he says. You nod. "We did." But then, of course, reality knocks, loudly, with muddy boots. A sharp rap on the side door, not the front. Never the front at this hour. You both freeze. A second knock, slower, more deliberate. You exchange a glance and rise, bones clicking, muscles reluctant. You open the door. It's a man in uniform, not a soldier, not a constable, a city official, well-dressed, well-fed. He holds a clipboard like a blade and looks at you as if you're something he might scrape off his boot. "Evening," he says without warmth. "We've had a report." You blink. "About?" "Your flour supplier. Mixed goods. Adulterants." He glances behind you into the bakehouse. "We're inspecting all affiliated shops. Effective immediately." You feel your stomach turn. Of course, the alum, the ghost of that bitter, gritty taste still haunts your mouth. "We tossed it," you say. "Didn't bake with it." He raises an eyebrow. "Make a note. We'll need to see your flour stores." your last 3 invoices. Any batches made with suspect material will need to be e-gestures, vaguely, with one clean-gloved hand disposed of. You nod, silently. The apprentice steps back, suddenly pale. You lead the inspector inside. Point out the new sacks. Show him the empty bin. Hand him the crumpled invoice you haven't even filed yet. He reads everything slowly, with the confidence of a man who's never had to bake anything in his life. He finishes his notes. I won't close you down, he says, like he's doing you a favor. But this stays on record. Then he leaves. Just like that. No, thank you. No good night. Just the lingering scent of ink and judgment. You stand in the doorway for a moment longer, staring into the dark, listening to the sound of the city exhale. Somewhere nearby, a dog barks twice, then falls silent. You close the door, walk back to the bench, sit down. The apprentice doesn't say anything. Neither do you. Because here's the thing about being a baker. You don't just battle the dough, or the heat, or the sleep. You battle everything. The suppliers, the laws, the fickle customers, the ever-shifting rules you're expected to follow with one hand tied behind your back and the other covered in burns. A mainstream historical fact. In late 19th century England, bakers were among the most inspected tradesmen. Every tool, every sack, every ounce was under scrutiny. They were essential and treated as suspects. Needed, but never trusted. You rub your hands together. They feel rough, splintered, like wood left out in the rain. The apprentice finally speaks. Are we in trouble? You shake your head. Number not yet. But he said, I know what he said. You get up, start wiping down the counter, slowly, methodically, one stroke at a time. He joins you. Another quirky tidbit. Some bakers believed that cleaning the shop at night brought good luck for the next day's rise. Others just did it because if they didn't, everything would harden into a nightmare by morning. You clean in silence, not because there's nothing to say, but because nothing needs to be said. You survive the day, and you'll survive the next. Eventually, you sit again, just for a moment. You look at your hands, and then at the boys, so small, but already scarred in familiar ways. You wonder if he'll become a baker, if he chooses it, or simply never manages to leave. He breaks the silence again. Do you ever think about doing something else? You don't answer right away. You think about quieter trades, shoemakers, bookbinders, even lamplighters. You think about waking up after sunrise, sitting for meals, wearing clean shirts. Then you think about the first time a loaf cracked just right. The first time a customer smiled without complaining. The first time you watched a child bite into your bread like it was the best thing they'd ever tasted. And then you say, sometimes. He nods. But not today. He grins. Me neither. You both sit there, watching the embers. 2 bakers, 1 bench, and tomorrow waiting just outside the door. You don't mean to fall asleep on the bench, but you do. 1 minute you're sitting upright, staring into the sleepy orange glow of the oven. Next, your chin hits your chest, and you're half dreaming of loaves that rise all on their own, soft and perfect, without kneading, without proofing, miracles made of air and kindness. Then your leg twitches, and you wake up to reality, pins and needles, a crick in your neck, and the unmistakable scent of scorched flour. Not enough to burn, just enough to remind you that nothing stays gentle forever in a bakery. You rub your face. It feels like old paper. The apprentice is still curled on the floor, snoring softly. He's clutching a lump of old dough like it's a stuffed animal. You shake your head. This place is quiet now, not just from the late hour, but from something deeper. Stillness. The kind that only happens after every fire has died down and every human's need for hunger, money, and motion has had its say. You rise slowly. Every joint in your body reminds you that you've been doing this too long. You hobble to the bench and begin your final task of the night, the tally. You open the little black book, the one with cracked corners and a spine bent from years of use. You record the sales. The loaves were given away. The buns were lost to the fire. The crusts were handed off to children with no shoes. A mainstream historical fact. Many Victorian bakers kept meticulous daily logs not for tax purposes, but for survival. Each ounce of flour, each farthing earned, each loaf wasted had to be tracked. One bad week could mean eviction, or worse, debtor's prison. Your pen scratches slowly, 7 cottage loaves, 10 rye, 24 rolls, 1 burned batch, 3 unpaid accounts. 1 jar of plum jam was received, consumed and appreciated. You close the book. Set it gently on the shelf beside the empty coin box. Your stomach growls, not in protest, but in quiet resignation. You've eaten technically, but your body knows better. It knows this isn't enough, that the fuel you've been living on for years is running thinner by the month. You pour the last of the tea, cold now, sharp with tannin. You drink it anyway. Another knock at the door. You frown. It's too late for customers, too late for officials. You open it cautiously. It's old Tom, the tinker. He's missing 2 teeth, wears 3 coats at once, and smells like boiled onions and pipe ash. But he always smiles, and he always knocks at the same time, once a month, on the day his pension drops. "Got a penny?" he says cheerfully. "Want a roll?" You sigh. "We're out." He looks down, disappointed but not surprised. You hesitate, then reach behind the counter. You pull out the emergency loaf, the one you hide behind the flour bin, the one you keep, not for money, but for moments like this. You hand it to him. He beams. "Bless you." Then he limps off into the night, loafing under one arm, coattails flapping behind him, like a pirate in retreat. A quirky tidbit: some bakers had unofficial 1 loaf per night policies, an unspoken understanding that no one who knocked with a penny would go away empty-handed even after closing. It was never advertised, but people knew and remembered. You lock the door, turn off the gas lamp, then stand still and listen. Not for danger, not for customers, but for yourself, your heartbeat, your breath, the gentle pop of the last ember in the oven, the scrape of the apprentice shifting in his sleep. This is it, the end of the day, and the end of a life in miniature. Because here's the truth. No one says out loud, bakers die early. It's not just a figure of speech. It's a rhythm of wear and tear, of lungs blackened by soot, of hearts worn down by long nights and short meals. Your body, like your loaves, rises and falls, and eventually it collapses under its own weight. A mainstream fact, grim but true: Victorian bakers often died in their 40s, not from violence or misfortune, but from slow attrition, respiratory illness, overwork, and malnutrition. Their bodies gave everything to the oven, and the oven always asked for more. You stare at your hands. They look older than the rest of you, cracked, calloused, burn-scarred in a dozen places. And yet, they still move, they still need, they still give. You exhale long and low and think, not for the first time, that you'll die here, not dramatically, not in flames or glory. Just one morning, after a night too long, your body will stop rising like a loaf that ran out of yeast. And when that day comes, the apprentice will take over. You glance at him now, still asleep, still snoring, still dreaming maybe of buns with perfect glaze, or a world where the oven isn't always hungry. And somehow, that thought comforts you, because when your hands no longer move, his will. And the bread will go on. The morning creeps in slowly, not with light because London mornings are rarely bright, but with the sounds, the distant clatter of hooves on cobbles, the clink of a milk bottle, the faint, wheezy whistle of a steam cart. You blink awake in your chair. The apprentice is already up, poking the fire with a stick like a boy at the beach. His face is blotchy with sleep, hair full of ash. But he grins when he sees you stir. "Morning," he says, as if it's the first time he's ever said it. Every morning is new when you're young. You nod, try to stretch, regret it. Well, we'd better get to it. The oven is still warm, not hot, not red, but not cold either. Just enough to start again. You sweep the flour bin, check the water bucket, crack your knuckles, one by one. You do this without thought now, the way others pray, the way birds find their way home. Your body remembers even when your brain resists. And somewhere in the middle of shaping a batch of dough for the rye loaves, it hits you. You've done this every day for 30 years. Every single day. The holidays, the winters, the sick days. That weren't really sick days, because if you didn't bake, people didn't eat, and the rent didn't wait. You glance at the wall. The little chalk tally's still there. Rye, 3. Burned, 0. Customers yelled at, also 0. But only because you've developed that special baker's scowl that suggests both wisdom and the capacity for unleashing flour-based vengeance. A mainstream historical fact. Victorian-era bakers rarely took time off. Many lived inside their shops or above them, keeping near constant watch over ovens that required round-the-clock tending. Even Sundays, supposedly a day of rest, were often prep days for Monday's market rush. You watch the apprentice twist a loaf too tightly. You stop him gently. "Like this," you say, reshaping it slowly. "Why?" he asks. You pause, because it burns otherwise, because it cracks, because it won't rise evenly, because it matters. But all you say is, "It just works better." He nods, tries again, still awkward but closer. You wipe your hands, sip a bit of water, the kind of water that tastes like tin and cellar mold and stillness. Then you look out the front window. A child is peering in, barefoot, nose pressed to the glass, watching the rising steam of the day's first loaves. You lift one off the rack, hold it up. The child beams and vanishes. They'll be back with a coin or with nothing. And either way, you'll find a roll that accidentally got squished and isn't good for display. A quirky tidbit. In poorer districts, bakers became informal caregivers to neighborhoods, offering stale bread for free, delivering leftover crusts to orphanages, even baking for funerals at no charge when they knew the family couldn't afford a meal, let alone a coffin. You roll out more dough, glance at the shelf. You've still got jam. You wonder if today will be a jam day, or a please, sir, just bread kind of day. Historians still argue whether the Victorian baking trade created a community or exploited it, whether bakers were local heroes or just another cog in the machinery of industrial food control. But on mornings like this, that argument feels distant. It's hard to analyze something when your hands are deep in dough and your lungs are full of smoke and spice. and the scent of something half holy. The apprentice finishes shaping the lost roll. You nod, approving. He grins. And then, just before you load the next tray, he asks, "Did it always suck?" You pause. You know what he means. The heat, the rules, the pain in your bones, the nights you missed weddings and births and quiet walks by the river. You look at the oven, the same one that scarred your arms, fed the neighborhood, and stolen decades of sleep. And then you smile. "No," you say. "Not always. Sometimes it just bakes, and sometimes, if you're lucky, it becomes you. Like flour in your nails, like soot in your laugh, like love in a loaf." He doesn't fully understand yet, but one day, maybe he will. You place the tray inside, and the door shuts with a sound that feels like a hymn. And now, the day is quiet again. The fire hums its low lullaby. The oven settles into stillness, and the world beyond the bakery turns softly on. You've done it. Another night, another batch, another sunrise met with aching hands and a heart that still beats tired, but steady. Out on the cobbled street, the morning unfolds like warm butter, slowly, richly, without rush. The scent of baked bread curls out from your little shop, winding around lampposts and chimneys, greeting dogs and milkmen alike. Inside, your apron hangs on its hook, dusted with the day's work. The flour bin is empty now. The bench was wiped clean. The broom stands in the corner like a tired old friend. You sit back on your stool, just for a minute, just to listen, to breathe, to feel what it means to have finished something. And as you close your eyes, the warmth of the oven wraps around you, not like heat this time, but like memory, like gratitude, like peace. Maybe you didn't choose this life, maybe it chose you. But for now, for this moment, you let it hold you, and it's enough. So take a breath, let it out slowly, and know that somewhere in a quiet corner of time, a baker rests, not because the world stopped needing bread, but because for now,